months ago, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a man who was pinning me down in my own bed. While it took a second for me to gather my thoughts and figure out what was happening, it didn't take long for me to realize that it was one of my own friends who I'd been visiting. He wasn't trying to hurt me. Instead, he was reliving events from Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was trying to protect me. So as he whispered things like, it's okay, just be quiet, I've got your back, I realized that these dramatic triggers happened on a nightly basis and that it was something that I was going to have to learn to get used to. Because of that, I spent countless hours researching post-traumatic stress syndrome in returning veterans of war. This was not only for educational purposes, but for personal purposes, as this is something that affects all of us and the world around every veteran who returns home from war. And according to a 2012 article in Military Medicine, there were 2.3 million troops who served in either Iraq or Afghanistan between the years of 2001 and 2011. That's 2.3 million troops, meaning the amount of individuals who are at risk for suffering from PTSD is much, much higher. And the consequences of PTSD can be very harmful to a veteran's overall quality of life. So it's important that we continue to improve the systems that we are currently using to prevent and screen for PTSD, and that we all take part in the treatment of those who are already diagnosed. So today the things that I'll discuss are what these consequences and negative effects are, solutions to improve our current systems, and how we can all be a part of the recovery process. So the first thing that we're going to address is the problem itself. Those who suffer from PTSD are faced with many negative and harmful consequences that may affect their daily lives. According to a 2013 article found in the Journal for Psychological Services, PTSD is the most common psychiatric diagnosis in returning war veterans. Currently, 21 to 23% of all those who return from Operation Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom have been diagnosed with PTSD. And according to the National Center for PTSD, common consequences include a multitude of stress reactions that stem from this kind of trauma. Some of these effects and systems of PTSD can include things like fear and anxiety. This can be things like fear of loud noises like fireworks that trigger a reaction to their emotional response of the sound of gunshots, or fear and the anxiety and jumpiness, also called hyperarousal, that is caused by things lying on the side of the road that trigger their sense of memory in regards to things like IEDs and roadside bombs. It can also be feelings of shame, guilt, and depression. This can be guilt for not being able to save the lives of others and those around them, and the guilt they feel for being faced with life or death situations that allowed them to, or that forced them, rather, to have to kill others and have to live with those decisions. It can also be increased bouts of anger and irritability, and this can be things like being short with their family, not having patience with their children, and blowing up and overreacting to things that are usually considered small misunderstandings. And most importantly, there's overall changes in their behavior. Now, this also includes the use of drugs and alcohol. Commonly, these things are used to help alleviate the stress of reliving an event or having to relive an event. The 2012 article that I mentioned earlier in Military Medicine also noted that 21% of those with PTSD also suffer from alcohol abuse, and 18% of them suffer from other drug and substance abuses. It can be expected that with this combination of problems, the severity of it can lead to really serious situations. So take, for example, the story of Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran Jason Klinkenberg. The LA Review Journal published his story in 2005. Jason watched his own friend burn to death while they served a tour in Iraq. This was the onset of his PTSD. Later, when he found out that it was going to be an additional month before he was discharged, before his discharge was pushed back, he attempted suicide. Once he finally was able to return home, he faced issues of drug and alcohol abuse. And finally later, after he decided to write a short autobiography on his life in his tour in Iraq, which was probably the trigger of his PTSD and reliving those events, he fatally shot and killed his wife and then himself. So when a problem has this many potential side effects or risks, the solutions need to be constantly evaluated. This leads us to our next point, which are the solutions. Currently, there are systems in place to prevent, screen, and treat PTSD. However, in situations where the end result can mean either life or death, all of these systems can serve to be improved. So let's take prevention, for example. Most troops are actually trained before they go into areas of war to face these, life-threatening consequences and have to deal with the side effects that come after. However, their spouses and those around them are not given any kind of training. The spouses themselves, some of them receive information on how to identify some of the symptoms of PTSD, but only 1/3 of spouses were provided this information according to a 2011 article in Military Medicine. So instead of only giving them information on how to diagnose PTSD or see the symptoms, we need to make it a common affair between all of the community and between those that are closest to them, so that not only are they able to look at the symptoms, but they know a clear plan of what they need to do afterward to help them get help, since they're going to be the ones living with the veterans once they return home. This will also help to kind of reduce that stigma that this is something that the veteran needs to be ashamed of. By making it a publicized event, they won't feel like they should be ashamed of how they're feeling, and they'll be more likely to want to come forward. The screening process is another area that needs to be improved. CNN reported on the story of the Fort Hood shooting that happened last week, and the connection between that and the possible shooters linked to having PTSD. In their story, they answered some common questions on PTSD, including how the screening process works. According to Dr. Michael Tell, professor at University of Texas, the screening process happens during the debriefing stage as a soldier prepares to go home. They undergo a series of questions, and if they feel like there's a risk for PTSD, then they're put into a full evaluation, which includes actual PTSD testing. Now, this process can be lengthy. For those who are just looking to get home after serving a long tour, these people sometimes fall through the cracks because they don't want them to see any indicators that they could possibly have post-traumatic stress disorder. So instead, the screening should be done at the onset of any abnormal trauma that happens while they're away at war, and intermittently throughout their tour of duty, so that way we can see if there's any kind of changes in behavior or things, signs of early PTSD identificators. So this leads us to the treatment of those who've been diagnosed. This is where you and I come in. The Department of Veterans Affairs has declared the month of June as PTSD Awareness Month and has called all Americans to action. So during the month of June, think strongly about your relationship and what you can do to help those with PTSD. Educate yourself and educate others who are faced with this disorder, and let other people know and raise awareness of the problem. Volunteer your time. If you have a local Veterans Affairs clinic in your town, volunteer to be a mentor and walk these veterans who have already been diagnosed through the recovery process. And if you absolutely just do not have time to do any of these things, donate to organizations such as the National Center for PTSD or even the Wounded Warrior Project. Overall, all of these solutions will aid in alleviating the problem and the stressors caused by PTSD. So in conclusion, now that we've discussed the negative consequences that PTSD has on the life of a veteran who's returning home from war and how we can help improve their quality of life by improving and aiding in the systems of prevention, screening, and the treatment of PTSD, we now have a chance to make a difference. So raise awareness and participate in the treatment of those who are returning home from war only to fight an internal war once they get back home. We can all find small windows of opportunity that we can use to help in their treatment and make sure that they get the attention that they so deserve.